After a 4 month pause, negotiations are resuming in Turkey. This is an important signal. Both Kyiv and our partners are once again betting on dialogue and searching for ways to achieve a just and lasting peace. Moscow has still shown no willingness to make any compromises. The Kremlin negotiators had plenty of complaints and accusations, pseudo historical digressions, and completely unfounded demands. Let's figure out which direction these negotiations might take and how U.S. sanctions could influence the Russian position. So, on Wednesday, November 19th, Volodymyr Zelensky arrived in Turkey to meet with the country's president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Thus, Ankara has once again stepped into the forefront of diplomacy, offering a platform to resume dialogue about peace. The key tasks at the moment are bringing Russia back to the negotiating table and reaching a real agreement on the exchange of prisoners of war. According to international media, Kiev hopes to use Washington's pressure on Moscow to break the deadlock in the stalled negotiation process. The Kremlin announced the day before that there would be no representatives from the Russian Federation at the meeting, but of course they will be closely monitoring its progress. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky wants to use the growing pressure from the United States on Moscow to revive the stalled diplomatic efforts to end the war with Russia. At the same time, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan may personally inform Moscow, which is not sending anyone to the meeting, about the results of the negotiations if a positive outcome is achieved, including the possibility of a prisoner exchange, according to a Bloomberg report. It is important to remember that just last week, Ukraine's Deputy Foreign Minister Serhiy Kyslytsya stated that peace talks with the Russians have essentially reached a dead end. In an interview with The Times, he said that the meetings in Istanbul, which took place on May 16th, June 2nd, and July 23rd of this year, had turned into a farce. The Russians refused to discuss concrete steps toward peace, denied Ukrainian identity, and suggested creating groups and messaging apps to simulate progress. At the same time, Putin's negotiators refused to even discuss a temporary ceasefire. The Russians constantly avoided discussing the substance of the matter. Instead, they suggested creating working groups and WhatsApp chats to fool the Americans, creating the illusion of progress and avoiding new sanctions. In normal negotiations, both sides lay out their arguments on the table, look for common ground, determine where the gray areas are, and where the absolutely unacceptable positions lie. We never even got to that stage. In addition, they monitor each other and report on how firmly each of them defended their position. Serhiy Kyslytsya, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, in an interview with The Times. What has changed over these 8 days, and why are so many experts convinced that the Kremlin will no longer be able to fool everyone and drag out the peace process? First of all, the transfer of frozen Russian assets for a reparations loan to Kiev is becoming increasingly realistic. At the summit in Brussels, the finance ministers of the EU countries essentially gave the green light to this issue. And the U.S. ambassador to NATO, Matthew Whitaker, has called on European allies to act even more decisively. Secondly, there are the sanctions imposed by the United States. The restrictions against the corporations Rosneft and Lukoil have already deprived the aggressor of billions in profits. Plus, Donald Trump has stated that he is ready to approve another bill to increase sanctions pressure on the Russian Federation. Congress is currently working on the final version of this document. The legislation allows Donald Trump, at his own discretion, to impose secondary sanctions and tariffs against countries that continue to buy cheap Russian oil and gas, thereby supporting Putin's war machine. This law is intended to give President Trump more flexibility and authority to force Putin to come to the negotiating table by putting pressure both on Putin and on the countries supporting him, such as Iran. I appreciate the strong bipartisan support for this law in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. Lindsey Graham, Republican senator, on social network X. Before his trip to Turkey, Volodymyr Zelensky secured the support of European partners. In Greece, the parties agreed to create a new gas corridor and to launch a project for the supply of American LNG starting in January 2026. In Spain, agreements were signed for a new aid package worth 615 million euros, which will strengthen Ukraine's air defense and support the reconstruction of destroyed cities. Paris agreed to provide Ukraine with Rafale fighter jets, SAMT air defense systems, missiles, and radars, as well as to develop joint defense production. The cooperation plan with France is designed for 10 years, and Ukraine may receive some of the aircraft from France's current stock. You are showing your willingness for peace. Only Russia continues the war. The intensification of strikes on Ukraine's critical infrastructure is further proof of this cynicism and aggression because every attack on civilians today is evidence that Russia's goal is to take your territories under its control. Russia's commitment to war pushes us to accelerate peace, and it is up to all of us to create this peace. These agreements on the eve of restarting negotiations in Turkey are of key importance. They show that Ukraine is approaching them with confident and renewed support from its partners. For Moscow, this is a direct signal. There is no such thing as so called Western fatigue from the war. European partners are demonstrating that strengthening Ukraine is not just a gesture of goodwill, but a part of their own security strategy. The flag of France.
France is with us, as is all of free Europe. We are being helped by the United States and other countries around the world, from Canada to Asian nations, from Japan to countries in Latin America. We've created one of the largest coalitions for the defense of life. Unity works. That is why we are able to shoot down Russian missiles and stop Russian assaults on the front lines every day. We are restoring our energy sector. It is very hard for us, very difficult, but we are rebuilding our infrastructure when Russia destroys it. And most importantly, we give other nations hope that Russia will not succeed in making war the new normal.
U.S. President Donald Trump has also sent a high-level Pentagon delegation to Kyiv. According to the news agency, this includes U.S. Secretary of the Army Dan Driscoll, as well as Army Chief of Staff Randy George. They intend to meet with a number of Ukrainian officials, with military personnel, and also to hold talks with Volodymyr Zelensky. American media report that Trump is very eager to give new momentum to negotiations to end Russia's war against Ukraine. And he is counting heavily on the military's mediation to make it happen.
The goal of the trip is to engage the Ukrainian leadership in resolving the stalled peace process with Russia, despite the fact that Moscow has rejected all previous attempts by the U.S. and Ukraine to stop the fighting. The U.S. and Ukraine are also working on a major agreement on exchanging technologies in the field of unmanned aerial vehicles and autonomous munitions, and this trip is partly intended to support those efforts. Ukraine has become a leader in developing and improving combat drones of both long and short range, which have changed the face of the battlefield and struck targets deep inside Russian territory. From a report by Politico.
Thus, Ukraine has restarted the Turkish negotiations, relying on the support of its partners and pressure from Washington on the Kremlin. Kyiv is counting heavily on international unity and the firm stance of its partners to help create conditions for real progress toward peace. After all, every day the aggressor kills civilians, wipes cities off the map, and destroys critical infrastructure. And that is precisely why international pressure on Moscow remains absolutely essential.